So the theme that we have chosen is interculturality in religious life. Thanks for this opportunity to the Capuchin Fathers, and especially a word of thanks to Father Charles Alphonse and Father Jane Ray for this warm invitation to be here this evening with you all. First of all, let me do a few disclaimers as I'm talking on interculturality. Number one, I'm a Jesuit and I'm addressing the Franciscans. So please understand that I'm talking only from a Jesuit background and I do not know much about the Franciscans, though I have a few Capuchin friends and my own scholar is also a Franciscan priest. Nevertheless, you should also excuse me that I'm an Indian and therefore all that I talk is from an Indian mindset. I was born here, I was brought up here, I grew up here, I studied here, everything is only Indian. And I'm also middle-aged. I'm not in my young days. And so my thinking is also in that line. Of course, I am a male, and therefore there might be some thinking from a male perspective. Lastly, I am a philosophy professional, sort of a philosophy seeker. I keep on seeking philosophy, and therefore you'll find a touch of philosophy in all that I'm going to say. I really do not know if this is a spiritual talk or a theology or a philosophy talk. Nevertheless, at the end of it, you could tell you could tell me what it is. My presentation has sort of 6 parts towards authentic growth. That's the introduction. Then I go into the context, existence. I examine the context, what is the context today, and then I shall go into the essence of interculturality. Engagement would come, how do we engage this in our religious life? And lastly, I conclude with a way forward. Friends, I just would like to, right in the beginning, tell you, I am not going to read the paper, I'm just going to talk to you. I have the presentations. And so the slides might be a bit heavy, but nevertheless, I think they might be definitely be simple enough for you to understand. And I will go from the first part now. Towards authentic growth. We always believe that growth never ends. The process of growth and the search to be authentic never ends in religious life. And that is why we say our religious life is dynamic and we say no to stagnation. But when we close our ears and eyes to the world around us, and when we have taken for granted all that we have and all that we are, then I feel stagnation enters. Now, just a couple of days ago, we finished our annual retreat. It was given by Father C. Amal, another Jesuit from Myanmar. He came down and he came. And one of the things, very striking thing that he said was this: our vow of celibacy is not a vow of sterility. The vow of celibacy is meant to help us to be productive, produce ideas, produce ministries, engage in ministries, write books, compose seminars, etc. And therefore, our vow of celibacy is meant to be productive. Now, why is this coming into the picture? Because I'm asking myself, am I sterile? Are we sterile? If the answer is yes, it is because we have come to understand and treat religious life as stagnant. Some think of religious life as archaic, obsolete, and one formula fits all type of thing. And there is a confusion today between essentials and non-essentials, form and content, negotiables and non-negotiables. And one of the most confused area in this is culture. You try to attempt to define culture, and each one will have a different way of understanding culture. And maybe all of them are right. But just let me quickly point out Guy Gofstede, a well-known Dutch researcher of culture, who defines culture as the collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from another. This is just a working definition that will help us to get on. And when we talk about culture, I feel that there are 3 intersecting cultures in religious life. One, an existing culture in the congregation, call it the Franciscan culture or the Jesuit culture or the Salesian culture. Then there is a home culture. As someone who joined in the congregations, I have inherited a culture and I have grown up with that, and then I come into that. And then there is a culture of the other member, and then there's a culture of the world around. So these are three intersecting cultures when we encounter religious life. Now, which culture would I follow? And which culture is right? Mine, yours, or theirs? An exploration of these interactions is the focus of this paper. And so the theme that I have chosen or that was given to me is interculturality in religious life. By the way, interculturality is not a strategy. It is not a strategy to deal with others, how I should deal with one another. It is not. But it is a new paradigm of how to live a dynamic, meaningful religious life. It's not completely new because from the beginning, most of us have lived interculturally. But it is in a way new because now we are bringing awareness and mindfulness of its existence in the world, especially in the global church and in the world today. And as to live as brothers and sisters, we cannot remain isolated or alienated. It is essential, I consider, to be intercultural, and I'll explain why. So what's the purpose? The purpose of this presentation or this talk is to highlight the importance of interculturality with a focus on awareness, appreciation, and acceptance of the others in our life and mission. And also, the Capuchins, you have a chapter coming up, and then the chapter theme is the Lord has given me brothers to go into the world. I think I'm right. Please pardon me if I'm wrong on this. Let me go to the second part, and I present what is our existence of experience, or maybe what is our context. But very quickly, just to go into the evolvement of religious life, we have four types of religious life: hermits and monks. It started as early as the early church, then the mendicant friars, then the clerks regular, and then the fourth is the nuns and brothers. Barring the monks, they didn't pay much attention to common way of living. The other three groups have given much importance to the communitarian dimension of religious life. Now, historically, we have developed. Each generation has revisited and renewed its understanding, relevance, and essence of its core existence. And various reforms have taken place in the church in understanding, re-understanding, reclaiming the charism and its concurrent practices. The Capuchins themselves are a result of this search. And so in 1528, with the papal bull Religionis Zelus, the Capuchin Franciscans became a religious order because they wanted to preserve that Franciscan zeal. Almost close to 500 years, you have started with that fervor, and today, now at this point in history, we are now trying to understand what is interculturality. And a very special word to the Franciscans is, I think, the word frater, which means friar, or which means brother. It's a very simple word. You all call yourselves brother, but actually it is a condensed word which includes spirituality, theology, sociology, politics. I just would like to make a small reference to the Jesuits. Frater indicates cura personalis. This is a term that we all use quite often in our circles, and which means a knowledge of the other is also part of it. Each brother is valued for what he is and for what he brings along as his gifts to the society. In 1528, again, you had this, sorry, it's just a repetition. You also have this community life. We all have, almost all religious harp on this community life. It is a gift, it is a task. It is a task because it is a conscious shift that we have to be making while entering into religious life, leaving behind one's own family. Now, do we leave behind our culture? I don't know. It becomes even more committed when we become public because we make our vows public, and therefore our community life is very important for us. In your constitution, number 106, this is what you say. Therefore, we too share in his mission, live in the midst of the world as a gospel labor, so that people, seeing a fraternal life lived in the spirit of the Beatitudes, may realize that the kingdom of God has already begun in their midst. In this way, we will be present in the world to serve the living God and in Franciscan love, humility, and joy, spreading peace and goodness for the benefit of the world and of the church. This I took from your constitutions, para 3 of number 106. So this is our context. But in the context, we also see that we experience a lot of tensions. And that is my second thing in this presentation. We have a tension between technology mediation versus tradition. There is technology invasion. There is a new era of thinking and relating. And many of us, many of the young people, they call themselves as digital natives. They've grown up with their modern gadgets. And so we now say there is an information explosion or inflosion or data deluge. This has led to changes in social behaviors, relationships, outlook on life, and has even affected our faith. There's a lot of dilemma. How much we should consume, what should we consume, and how much of our tradition has been affected. Now, there is also this risks in intergenerational relationships within religious communities and ministries. Then the second one is uniformity versus diversity. There is a stress on uniformity. All should have the same habit, same dress, even same thinking in a way. Uniformity has its advantage, but when it comes to central governance, it is very good. But it's not the same with diversity. There are non-negotiables, such as the rule of the Franciscan orders, and rightly from 23 to 26, the Franciscan fraternity is celebrating the 5 centenaries, and definitely there are some of these are non-negotiables. But how do you practice these non-negotiables or uniformity when it comes to diversity? Because you are in different continents, different cultures, and different styles and patterns are there. The third contention is identity versus commonality. Letting go of one's identity, yet holding on to it both for emotional purposes and civil purposes. Just an example, if an Indian brother or sister continues to be in another country and takes up that citizenship, she or he doesn't become an American or European. They are still called, you're from India, your roots are there. So certain identities tend to sit or tend to hold on to the person for a longer time. In other cases, an individual identity has to be shed for the sake of a new identity, like a Franciscan identity, a Jesuit identity, a Salesian identity. Which one is important? Neither or both. Then we have tolerance, another tension, tolerance versus celebration. Okay, I tolerate you in this congregation because I need you. Maybe you're from a minority community, but I need representation. We tolerate. We tolerate because now they have taken their vows and they are now a brother or a sister. Is that really fraternal care? Or can we genuinely celebrate diversity and acknowledge the culture of the other? There are tensions here. There is also this tension between presence versus absence. The presence of certain dominant cultures and the absence of a few cultures gave rise to parochialism. Many communities are homogeneous, and while these has its own advantages, closed-mindedness creates. And with no knowledge of the other, ignorance becomes possible, and at a certain stage, universality is forgotten, and provincialism, or what you call as regionalism, comes into place. The third, in this context, the title, to go into the world, Franciscans are called to go. And in the upcoming general chapter, you have 2 important words, collaboration and mission. And in this context, when you go into the world, what do you look into the world? What do you see? You see that there is a shift in religious demographics because of forced migrations. You also see growing mistrust and distancing from formal religions because of various factors, including massive growth of Pentecostalism. And then in countries like US and Europe, we have these nuns, which means they do not like to align to any religion. I will shift from here to here, or I don't belong. They don't like to call themselves any more organized religion. And now when it comes to the global south, especially in countries like India, we have religions being abused by many political parties for their own Western interests. And you know what is happening just now in India. We are facing elections, and this is quite crucial for us. And now we also have new levels of interfaith engagement. Negatively, while that is there, positively, we also have interreligious dialogue being spoken everywhere. Even at the Synod of Bishops on synodality, the Pope in the synthesis report, when you read, the mention of interreligious dialogue has taken prominence. These are all positive signs of hope that emerge. What else do we see? We experience diversity in the world, growth in tourism and technological advancements. There is a broader understanding of diversity across the globe. And due to globalization, whatever happens in one corner of the world, just as of now, just now, I'm addressing, I do not know from how many countries you're all there. And so many of us, so many of us, there is this multiculturalism, and that is reshaping the globe. And communication technologies have connected the world. In a way, indigenous communities are claiming a legitimate space in public policies, decisions. Recently, I mean, you know what had happened in New Zealand. The indigenous people were wanted. They wanted a representation in the parliament. Now all those things happen. So there is this experience. But also we have polarization and divisions on the increase. A lot of people are going to war, with many wars on the increase. And just now we know what is happening in Russia and Israel. So many. And then the spread of Islamophobia is also on the rise. Targeted, silenced, alienated. Is it a peaceful world, or was it ever? That's a sort of question I leave you with. Let us go to the part 3. So I presented the context. With this context in hand, let's now just see what could we draw from the exam, what could we analyze from the present context. So examining the present context, I have a few points to share. Number one is I will take Pierre Bourdieu, a sociologist, a public intellectual, who comes up with a concept called doxa. Now, friends, please understand that this concept called doxa is very important for us in this lecture today, because doxa is something that all of us have. Fundamental, deep-founded, unthought beliefs. They are taken as self-evident. For example, I grew up in a culture where no one told us that men should not cry. But suddenly, when I cried, they said, hey, you don't know that you should not cry. So this is sort of, I pick up from the society, the caste system here in India, the patriarchal mindset. These are all part of this doxa. Doxa tends to favor the social arrangement, and it privileges the dominant and taking the position of dominance as self-evident and universally favorable. Something very similar to what Gramsci called common sense. Yeah. The second one is the Western gaze. So as we examine this context, we also find there's a Western gaze, which means the Europeans or the Westerners call themselves as the reference points. Hegel, in my paper, I shall pass on the paper later on. The paper contains a big reference to Hegel, who considers that there is nothing called history elsewhere apart from Europe. And this is what they said: those who are in sync with their values, beliefs, practices, and actions were cultured and civilized, and they had their own ways of and those who did not have their ways of understanding were called as savage, barbarian, uncouth, etc. They had to be civilized, and religion is one of the major tools to make them civilized. This Eurocentric type of thinking dismisses other cultures
you. There is an internet problem. It seems that let us wait.
Father Robin says that he is reconnecting. Please wait for some time. In 2-3 minutes, he is going to reconnect. Sorry for the interruption. He had an internet problem, so he's going to reconnect. Thank you.
Most High, Almighty Lord, yours the blessings and glory be. Only honor belongs to you for all eternity. Be praised, Lord of the creature world, and first a brother and son, who through the day and light you give reflects you, O Holy One. Be praised through seas, the moon and stars, bright and precious they shine above. Through brother, wind and all weathers too, be praised, O Lord of love. Through sister water, Lord, be praised, for fair and chaste is she. And brother, father, light and night, so strong and bright is he. Be praised through sister mother earth, for she sustains and guides our way, and yields so many fruits and grass and flowers to brighten our day. Be praised through all who pardon give, for love of you bearing their pain. Lesson and suffering peacefully, they shall not cry in vain.
I think Father has come back. Welcome back, Father.
I'm so sorry, sister. There was a sudden disruption in our network here.
It's okay. There is a request to speak slowly, so that that will help the translators to translate well.
Sure, I shall. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, friends. This is I'm in a remote place, and so suddenly the net got disconnected, which is normally does not happen, but it happened. Okay, I shall continue.
Yes, you can continue, Father.
Yeah, thank you. So I was talking about the Western gaze and this overt eagerness to appeal to the Western audience, whose approval matters, has also got ingrained in many of the non-Westerners. Because we would like to get their pity and curiosity, shock and surprise. So that sort of approval is all that we are looking for. Then the third thing is there is resistance and pessimism. Those who don't come from one's own culture are often looked with suspicion. Neuroscience also said that we are hardwired with negativities. And so I normally look at the other as a threat and suspicion, and also with pessimism. Even when they try to rise up to the expectations of the already educated and formed religious, a condescending look is always prevailing. And we see that within religious life and outside as well. And part of this resistance is to have a very superficial perspective and not even care to look at their hidden meanings and embedded wisdom of other cultures. Oh, this culture, I know it. And then there is also this presumptions. There is assumption of similarities, to consider others also as being in the same cultural mindset and wavelength, and refusing to acknowledge the uniqueness of the other. So these are all part of resistance and pessimism. Then there is another problem called othering. We observe this othering. What is othering? It is the construction and identification of the self or in-group and the other or out-group in mutual unequal opposition by attributing relative inferiority or radical alienness to the other group. So when I say you are the other is not part of me. And that is what we observe in this whole concept called othering. And you will find this happening everywhere, within religious life, outside religious life, all the time happening. A fifth thing that we examine and look at the context is the manipulation of power. Byung-Chul Han, a philosopher from South Korea in Germany, talks about in the Burnout Society, he talks about this culture is manipulative and the powers shape it. Now, who suffers at the end? The weak become voiceless. And then there is another new phenomenon which he tries to bring out, and he says this is called the violence of positivity. The violence of positivity does not deprive, rather it saturates. It does not exclude, rather it exhausts. Well, this is something very strange that is happening today. And it's a very clever way. And it's not a new way either. The example that I'm giving here is what we used to call as co-option. Co-option is, you are my enemy or you are something, you're not mine, but I give you an embrace and make you mine. I co-opt. For example, some Hindus do not want to consider Sikhism as a separate religion. Speak of it and they get very wild. And they think, no, how is it you can say that it is a separate religion? It is not. So because this is where they are saying is a very positive approach, but then it actually suffocates and strangulates the other. The last one is ignorance. All of us know the famous story in the well, the story of the frog in the well. I don't repeat it. But the frog in the well story talks about how ignorant we are and still blissful of it in the other. And therefore, much of the problems that come up today, especially regarding respecting the other, comes from a very, very ignorant type of understanding. So we go to the next part 4. What we are going to do in this part is this is the context we saw, the context, and we examined the context. Now I would like to present what is interculturality and what is the essential part of it. Please understand that what I'm presenting is not the complete exhaustive list, but sort of I've arranged it in such a way it can become easy for us to understand. Interculturality is relationship. I'll explain this, what is relationship, in 3 points. Number 1, it is reciprocity. Interculturality is about reciprocal relationships. Now, primarily as religious people, whatever religious we are, our primary duty is to rebuild relationships, and that is our primary mission. And no relationship worth its name can remain unaffected by the presence and interaction of the other. By the time you finish this presentation with me, I am going to be affected, changed, positively, negatively, somehow. And you also will be affected positively or negatively somehow. And that is how human relations affect each other. Now, this reciprocity is the opposite of touch me not kind of relationships or a consumeristic notion of dealing with one another. There is a conscious reciprocity in authentic relationships. And this is what is interculturality. It is dynamic relationship. Cultures are not static. Interculturality is about a dynamic relationship. It is where 2 cultures are mingling, where one borrows from the other, learns from the other, connects with the other, and then produces new configurations, forms, and cultural practices. As I'm talking to you, I also request you to go back to your own cultural interactions with other cultures. And did you find these things? 2 cultures meet, and both of them then emerge a new culture. Maybe all our religious cultures are partly coming from this time. The third one here in this column is it is free of hegemony. Now, one of the key notions is mutuality and equality. There is no superiority, no inferiority complex, no majority-minority kind of idea. We have to be mindful of the colonial tendencies, especially, please understand, we were colonized. And so there is this colonization going on, as well as a neo-colonizing going on, as well as post-colonial facts that we are facing. So we need to become aware of these. And in interculturality, there is no centering, which means there is no one center. There is no Orientalism center, no colonialism center, no Eurocentrism. These all have to go. And there is no ethnocentrism either. It is free of hegemony. Interculturality is a mutual learning process. If interculturality is a relationship, it is also a mutual learning process. And I would like to explain this in 3 sub-themes. Number 1, it accepts the uniqueness and nobleness in the other culture, which is worthy of learning. Each culture is born out of a context and therefore has contributed to the growth of that particular culture. It may have a universal appeal, but that does not make it may or may not have, but that doesn't make it less valuable. Being intercultural is more than just having a sort of a tokenism for the sake of perceived diversity. It is actually a willingness to release any sense of cultural superiority. And it accepts the uniqueness and the nobility of the other culture. And therefore, I can learn something from that. It also believes that God is present and active in every context of the church. And that we hear more from one another. As you keep on listening to one another, then you see the largeness of God's vision for us and the world. It definitely stretches us, deepens us, forms us, and at last transforms us. It also involves openness, willingness, and flexibility. Our judgments are based more than often on a pre-understanding of any given idea or reality. No learning takes place without the prerequisites of openness, willingness, and flexibility. I don't relate with another culture in a tabula rasa type of situation. Tabula rasa is a term that we use in philosophy to say a clean slate. That my mind is a clean slate. And therefore, a comparison sort of thing is inevitable. But that exactly is the problem. That is the hindrance. A conscious bracketing of one's own approach to a particular piece of information or encounter is very essential. So when I'm encountering another culture, I need to bracket out. I need to consciously keep this separate. And that is where flexibility comes in. I need to be open to the ultimate strangeness of the other, and hence of being taught something radically new by the other, so far which has not been accounted by my rationality. Now, very often what happens with the Eastern and the Western minds is the dominance of rationality. In some communities, the dominance of everything has to be reasoned out. In the East, they go by emotions as well. The next point, it involves wisdom. Learning involves wisdom. To know that one is ignorant, to know that I have many presumptions is the beginning of wisdom. But unwittingly, what happens is, even in religious life, we have this arrogance, a cultural superiority, or sort of a popular cultural trends that tendency to absorb. It is wisdom to know that the other person whom we encounter, either in our community or in our mission, is also on a similar search for wisdom. No culture is complete. No culture is devoid of wisdom completely either. Now, in our country, in India, we have a lot of oral traditions. Now, the tendency to simply poo-poo the oral traditions was there. They even use the word little traditions, of which I'm not convinced of. The idea of this wisdom not being found in tribal cultures, local cultures, indigenous culture was very strong. But now, slowly and slowly, becoming aware of interculturality, we realize that hidden treasures, or what we call as encapsulated philosophies, are found in oral literature, oral traditions. The third point of what is essential about interculturality is it is acknowledgement. It is acknowledgement of differences primarily. You and I are different, and there's no problem with that. Yes. For example, we have, when I deal with interreligious dialogues, we have to understand that they don't like even the mention of pork, because pork is non-acceptable to them. And something that we have to agree, yes, it's okay that you don't agree with us. We agree that there are serious differences, but that does not stop us from respecting or learning from the other. Now, interculturality does not seek an imposition of one's culture. It does not even seek to convince the other of one's own cultural settings. And there is absolutely no desire to change or convert the other to one's own ideas, and ideologies. Interculturality acknowledges the presence of other cultures, even if it is very small. Cultures are communitarian based, and since each culture has grown in a particular context as a response to that particular situation, they are valid. Because they have contributed to the preservation, sustenance, and growth of one particular community, and therefore they need to be acknowledged. And acknowledgement does not mean agreement. It merely says that one is aware and mindful of the presence of the other. It is also to do with common space, or what we shall call as in-between space. So interculturality acknowledges that there is an in-between space between two cultures, and that is the space in which there is a meeting point. While talking about dialogue, Martin Buber actually comes up with this whole idea. Dialogue is not happening in that person or in this person. It is happening in between. And that is where I picked up this point, in between space. And that in between space which is created for the other, even if it is very small, to listen, understand, and value the other. And that is what we shall call as the sacred space. Towards the end, I shall talk about Jesus and the Samaritan woman again, because that is a common space in which he meets. And that conversation eventually leads to a transformation. It is also an acknowledgement of subjective perceptions in holding on to truth. One's own idea of truth is always subjective, for one understands it only from one's own perspective. Right in the beginning, I gave you a disclaimer and said, I am thinking like a male, and I cannot but think only like a male. And that is my limitation. And so is the case with all of us. We don't deny the veracity, we don't deny the truthfulness, but interculturality will hold on to that idea. To hold on to an idea as an ultimate truth is not part of interculturality. If I were to ask you, friends, which is tastier, half-boiled egg or full-boiled egg, you may come with some idea. What we need to do is to acknowledge that both tastes exist as right, though one may wonder if there is a need for ethical judgment over everything. We have this habit of having an ethical judgment on everything. We have to place it in good or bad, right or wrong. The next point about interculturality, an essential thing is it is an attitude. Interculturality is an attitude of inner freedom. It's an attitude, where you are joyfully, willingly mingling with others. As little children, we all did that. And now, later on, we said we and they. There was a spontaneity relationship, but later, social norms, principles, guidelines, and then we lost that freedom. A wall was constructed between us and them, between I and you. Fear and distrust took over. But inner freedom is what is interculturality all about. It is also to look at cultures as fields of infinite possibilities. Unfortunately, our education, our formation in religious houses, I've been a formator for quite some time, and I know how our formation seek to curb our capacities to think freely, and our boundaries of thinking have stopped us. Interculturality is primarily an attitude of looking beyond these boundaries. Surprises, astonishments, and amazements, they all wait for those who have such an attitude. It's also about patience. We all have our own cultural shocks. But if one can be patient with oneself, with others, and with the circumstances, then interculturality is in place. It is easier to criticize a culture just because it doesn't agree with mine or fit into my framework. But if I have patience, I can always give a better response later. It is also essential to understand one's own limitations and strengths, one's own levels of patience in understanding the content, expression, and intent of the others. It is also about acceptance. One may not agree with another cultural trait, but to accept the other at their own level without longing or placing demands for them to change is interculturality. Especially in intergenerationality also you will find this problem. In many of our communities, old people are there, young people are there, just entered novices, that kind of people are there. And there is this whole idea of acceptance of the other as they are. And now I go to sort of the second, coming to the close, the fifth part, and then I have sixth part. How do we engage interculturality in religious life? So, with some theory that we have seen, with the context that we saw earlier, I would like to connect it to come to some understanding, some praxis. May not be immediately practical points for every community, but sort of some arrangement. Number one, let me begin with saying that the focus of religious life has always been communion with Christ, communion with God's people, and communion with one another. Spirituality, mission, and community life. And these three aspects are well articulated in the two words, collaboration and mission, that the Gender Chapter 2024 will be taking up. And interculturality fits in very well. So there are three principles which we should now keep in mind: discernment, accompaniment, and adaptation. Let me explain very quickly discernment, just 2 lines each before I go to the conclusion. Discernment is to seek the will of God, that we use cultures as a radical tool as a radical tool to spread the reign of God. So for us, that is very important because the form and the content in any given matter are to be important. Both these are subject to discernment. Though the form, which is the carrier of the content, is crucial for our considerations, cultures contain both content and form. And so we need to ask, are we cultural sensitive, especially at the local cultures? We also need to discern if most of the cultures represented in the congregation have a dignified voice, or are there subtle ways in which voices are subdued? I go to the next point. Sorry. Accompaniment. Accompaniment. To accompany someone is personalized care and attention that is needed. An accompaniment is not a hierarchical process. It is walking together with care and compassion. I just want to bring in a little quote from Father Superior General of the Society of Jesus, Father Arturo Souza. He says, it is that accompaniment in which a space is created, an in-between space in which patience, encouragement, and charity are exercised. The accompaniment of the other is meant for all. The third point, adaptation, shared framework. This is an ongoing process where we keep discovering and learning from other cultures, where we can find resonance with the local culture. The idea of inculturation is not rooted in many of our communities, and there's still a lot of misunderstanding around that area. But I think we need to learn to adapt. So with these three principles, I would like to go to the last 4 areas. How can we engage interculturality? This is how I understand religious life. Religious life contains these 4 things: mission, community, self, and spirituality. So number 1, mission. Interculturality in mission is a continuous, complex, and tedious task. Reading the signs of the times is part of this intercultural exercise. And so even in order to be significant, one needs to be alert and agile to the processes of othering. If you remember, I said in the beginning, that is happening, the doxa that is within me, and the resistance that I offer. Even from well-meaning Catholics, sometimes these things come. So back in the mission, how do we employ? Let's become more aware of inculturation. It's about the form and the content. It is to bring God and the gospel values to a local populace in forms that are used locally. For a long time, certain forms were used with caution. The second level of inculturation is to reinterpret the gospel content. And the third level is to discover local resources that leads to God. Now this third level, I think, is very important, because that is where we discover and say, God is speaking to us here in our context as well. In mission, the love for uniformity has driven many to understand Jesus' prayer in John chapter 17. May they all be one, as a sign of God asking for uniformity. Rather, Catholicism should be understood as universality and not as uniformity. Unity is better understood as an acceptance and celebration of diversity, rather than a strict monarchical approach or a colonial mindset and impose one perspective only. Now, there is also this movement towards social justice. It is an accompaniment with the poor and the suffering in the local context. Today, we discover that almost all our social issues are interconnected beyond national boundaries. And so today is very hot here, it's 42 degrees here, and partly it's climate change. So everything is interconnected. The last point in this section is cultural capital. Let's become aware of the intangible resources that a community has, often unexplored. These resources are available at individual, community, institutional levels, and intercultural education can help in identifying this cultural capital, which can help in social justice missions. And same formula we can apply in other missions: education, direct evangelism, CV, community development, healthcare, agriculture, outreach, refugee services, etc. In many of these things, we can apply this understanding. Coming to our community life, that is something, the next sacred thing. If mission is important, so is community. We need awareness, appreciation, and acceptance. First, primarily, becoming aware of our own doxa. Now, that is a big process because community, we always think it is about relating with the other. Rather, before relating, I relate with myself and then becoming aware of patterns of othering and awareness of our own resistances and power manipulative practices are very important. Second, we need empathy. Justin Bariso in that book, EQ Applied, says, what is empathy? The ability to understand and share the thoughts or feelings of another. And here there are three kinds of empathy, and I think these three Daniel Goleman speaks of, and Justin Bariso is quoting. Cognitive empathy, which means an ability to understand how a person feels and what they might be thinking. It's at the cognitive level, at the cognition, the knowledge level. And that is very, very important. Cognitive. Do I understand what the other is speaking? The second one is affective empathy, or we call it as emotional empathy, to share the feelings of another person. Some describe it as your pain in my heart. That way you build emotional connections. The third one is compassionate empathy. Just beyond is to go beyond simply understanding and to share their feelings. It moves us to action. However, in whatever way we can. So these are the three things we can do in community. We can also do a third one, which we call as the experience of liminality. Now, liminality, this word came in 1909 by Arnold von Genner, but in the context of rites of passage. In the rites of passage, he talks about three things: the stage of separation, the stage of transition, and the stage of reintegration. And I'm using this concept to say how in our own communities, interculturally, we can become aware of this liminality. When I am sharing my life with another person of another culture, I am actually entering into a threshold. The threshold. In that point, there is a feeling of separation, yes. There is a confusion, yes, that is a transition. But I'm also able to reintegrate. Becoming aware of this liminality will help us to cross boundaries and to genuinely learn about the other. And that experience of liminality will help us to step into newness. The third point in the self, mission, community, self. In this self, we need to become aware that we are not unaffected persons, we are affected persons. We are hard hit by the world today. I'm just giving a philosopher, Franco Bifo Berardi, who coined this term, the slow cancellation of the future. Let's become aware that for younger generations, the future is not there. We are in a stagnant culture. Aesthetic resistance on the rise. Hopes for the future is just ideas because we are encountering crisis after crisis. Just recently we had COVID, and then came wars, and now you find across the world global warming taking place. And so the individual self is trapped, lost, even as religious people. And so what we need is an experience of existential freedom and inner freedom. But when we become intercultural beings, we experience both, because I'm able to cross boundaries and I'm also able to experience getting out of my own self. And then this whole idea of stagnant culture will go away and a dynamic culture can come. As intercultural beings, especially as fratres, being very conscious of fraternity, we need to become aware of our stereotypes, prejudices, and biases. And sometimes, these come out in the form of retorts. I retort immediately, or jokes, cynical remarks. And introspection into one's own doxa is very important.
I think he's reconnected, brothers. È collegato, mi pare. Chico? Chico? Mi pare è ricollegato, sì.
No, non ancora.
Father, you're connected, Father. Are you
Now he
I-
came.
Yeah, shall I continue, sister?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, so I was talking about spirituality. I'll quickly wind up. In spirituality, we find this how interculturality can affect spirituality. A paradigm. Don't see God in space alone, but see God in time also. Any congregation, every congregation, a spirituality of that congregation was cultural specific, was context specific. It was a series of events in a historical setting. Though we call it as universal, it was born, and therefore it was inculturated at that time. We need to have spirituality inculturated now also. In the spiritual realm, again, we need to have this. We are historical beings and relational beings. Now, quite often, what happens is dehistorified, devalued, and dehumanization has been taking place. And so, a spirituality that will oppose the processes of othering and uphold the idea that God is present in dynamic in all cultures is what we need to do now. This paradigm, our Father, if we take it seriously, then what I began, acknowledge, appreciate, and become aware of our Father will be actually a response to the polarization world. I'd like to bring in the Jainism principle of Anekantavada, which we also call it the philosophy of multiple perspectives of truth. It offers a broad perspective of understanding truth. Primarily, it is ignorance, and that ignorance causes many of the problems. So, for example, if there is one particular trait of spirituality and you hold on to it and say, this is the only way to reach heaven, think again. Think again. Our intercultural spirituality will tell us that there are different ways, different models. Look at all the martyrs and the saints in the society, you get an idea. There is no one way to sainthood. Some profoundly pray, some work profoundly. Both are accepted. And so that sort of openness in spirituality is what we need. It also needs to address the issue of fear in insecurity in persons. Very often, many people are frightened, they have a lot of distrust about Eastern practices. I'm now talking about the West. Similarly, in the East, we have a lot of suspicion about Lectio Divina, too much of work, verbal prayers. So, only when you encounter and experience another culture, the doubts will be clear. And so, for example, as an Indian, I practice some meditations. Now, that meditations are not esoteric meditations, they are meditations, common meditations, and I'm able to talk to my God, I'm able to encounter my God through my spirituality, through an Indian type of spirituality. And so that fear and insecurity within people needs to be taken out only when you encounter, or let's call it as an exposure. Sister, I'm coming to the end, and finally at part 6. Just the way forward. Just a few lines. Let there be enlightenment. The General Assembly's theme is the Lord has given me brothers to go into the world. It makes a lot of sense in the context of interculturality. I'm just reframing your assembly theme and saying, the Lord has given me brothers from all cultures, and they need to be loved, cared for, and ennobled. To go into the world, a world full of cultural interactions and relations, is a call to interculturality. Now, that would mean acknowledge and celebrating differences without a desire to change the other or steal the other of their cultural rich resources. The underlying principle in all of this is love. Where there is charity and love, God is there, says an ancient chant known as Ubi Caritas et Amor. Jesus, I want to end with Jesus. Jesus was intercultural. I began somewhere in the middle, I talked about the Samaritan woman at the well, that was an open space. When Jesus was doing that, there were no negative generalizations, no stereotypes from Jesus, and there was a willingness to step into the world of the other. He invited her gently out of her narrow worldviews and brought her to realize life. The early Christians had to learn this. They learned that interculturality was the way, and hence permitted the question of circumcision to be dealt with positively. Jesus can be our model. Let him be our enlightenment. The essence of religious life cannot be wasted away in mere small, narrow-mindedness. Ours is a big God, and we have inherited a big world. Let us be open to the world and go into the world to proclaim the good news. My work is still in progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father, for your powerful presentation and helped us to give a broad vision about interculturality and religious life. Thank you. Is there anyone to have a question in the chat, or you can ask directly to the Father? Some clarification. I think Father has explained very well and clarified already within the content. There is no questions. Shall we wind up? There is a chat.
So there is a question.
Yeah, there is a question.
How could we resolve?
How could we the tension between multiculturality and the shared common values?
I don't have a ready-made answer for this question because two things. One, every local encounter has to be dealt locally. But how do we resolve the tension between multiculturality and shared common values? You have to come to dialogue, and that is where intercultural dialogues are very important. The dialogue that we are talking about is basically about letting the cat out of my bag and let you know that I'm not agreeing to what you're saying, or what you are saying, I am not able to agree with. So there has to be a dialogue. Of course, how to dialogue very respectfully, all of us know in our religious congregations. But a little word that is disturbing there is multiculturality. What we are now talking is not about multiculturality, we are talking about interculturality. Multiculturality is the presence of different cultures and they can all be there. While interculturality is about interacting with different cultures. And so a little clarity on that also would be. Now, shared common values, if it is born out of an intercultural interaction, that's one fantastic. But otherwise, if it has been imposed, now because of our vows, we take certain things out of obedience, but nevertheless, we either need to internalize, but we also need to have dialogues, and that is where I think they will become more sensible. The second question, how is the intercultural dimension active in the Jesuit order that can help Capuchins? Maybe an example would be helpful. First of all, we are also the same boat like you. We are not so. I wouldn't think we have gone much ahead, and then we are having this presentation as one who is an expert in intercultural interaction in the Jesuit orders coming to preach to the Capuchins. No, not at all. Please forgive me. It's not that way. But nevertheless, how is the intercultural dimension active in the Jesuit order? A small example that might be of help is recently the entire society had these preferences. We wanted to take up and we wanted to ask everyone in the congregation what should be the preference of the society in the next 10 years. So that this exercise happened somewhere in 2017 and 2019. And so when we did that, everyone's voice was heard. Everyone, every individual, including the Jesuit novice, everyone's voice was recorded and it was sent to Rome. And then, of course, it went step by step. First to the zone, then to the province, then to the assistancy, then to the highest general curia. And from there, they collected, collated, respected every view and put them together. So that was a sort of a feeling for all of us. Yes, we were part of it. And recently, just a couple of years back, we did another exercise on poverty, on the woe of poverty. The entire society was involved in it. This year, we are doing another collective exercise on De Status Societatis, which means the state of the Society of Jesus. And we, again, are giving our own ideas. And so all this... this is where I think there's a lot of give and take at the local and at the provincial and at the assistancy and at the higher levels.
Okay, thank you so much, Father.
Thank you, Sister.
I would like to thank both the resource persons for your wonderful presentation. The first session, we listened to Father Harold on Franciscan vocation, fidelity, and perseverance. He insisted in forming in fraternal life is more important than forming academically or giving an intellectual work. Also, he concluded with his session with young brothers can see the fraternal life in the seniors adults. That will help them to grow in the future with a fraternal community, which helps to live our vocation as Franciscans. In the second session, Father Robin, intercultural religious life, he started with culture is one of the confused area is culture. He started with that. And then he explained and he developed with the experiences of tension. And then he also insisted that the examination to be done, the new word for me, it is doxa. See, he explained clearly that one. Also, the resistance and permission, othering, and the manipulation of power. These are the things to be considered as examination. And then also he insisted about the essence of interculturality. In that he explained very well, interculturality is a dynamic relationship. It is not a stagnatic. And also it is a mutual learning. And also it is an acknowledgement and an attitude. I feel that there is a large, from the confusion to bring, he brought us to the inner freedom. Interculturality is an attitude change, inner freedom. So there is a transformation which brings to live our Franciscan communities in a better way by accepting, acknowledging, and also he concluded towards the end, the 4 areas of religious life: mission, community, self and spirituality. I thank both of you for your wonderful preparation and presentation, which helped surely each one of us to gain and also in the future to live our vocation as Franciscan more effectively. Thank you, fathers.
Thank you, sister. Thank you.
Also, I appreciate and thank Brother Charles and Brother James Ray for their great effort and courage to organize this formation refreshment courses to renew ourselves as Franciscans. So special thanks to Brother Charles for trusting me and giving me this opportunity. Thank you, brother. I thank sincerely all the translators. Without them, our sessions will be like the experience of Tower of Babel. Thank you for your good efforts and generous contribution, especially for the second session with the speed up of Father. You have done your job well. I thank all the technicians. Their role is important and that helped us to contact us all through, though we are all dispersed in different parts of the world. I thank you all who present today's session for your valuable presence and lively participation, which kept these sessions more alive. Thank you.